con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogarplenitud.org.es, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, Serenidad.es, Permasalud Glamping, permasalud.com.
Welcome to this radio show, esteemed listeners. Today, we're going to have a dialogue, an interview with Tal Skloot, who is an award-winning filmmaker with a credit list of over 20 feature-length documentaries and narrative films that have won multiple Emmy Awards, have been broadcasted nationally on PBS, NBC, ABC, CBS, and have appeared in numerous national and international film festivals. Tal is a graduate of the American Film Institute, UCSC, and is an adjunct faculty member at Sonoma State University and Diablo Valley College. He has directed television shows including America's Next Top Model, The Voice, and directed commercials for Pepsi, Nike, and McDonald's. He also produced Four Wheel Bob, a feature-length PBS documentary about a wheelchair hiker and his attempt to cross the Sierra Nevada. When he's not teaching or filming, Tal enjoys hiking, biking, playing soccer, and yelping for new restaurants after all that exercise. Today, he is here with us to present his new project, A Quiet Revolution, which is a story of Windham Hill Records. We will also listen to music from different Windham Hill artists throughout the interview. We are very glad to show you this documentary, and we are glad that Windham Hill Records is being acknowledged for its impact in the New Age music world. We will be back with the interview shortly.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como Goipas R, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad S. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Okay, today we have a very special program. We are going to talk with Tal Skloot. He's a film director that lives in Berkeley, California, or the surroundings. And he is doing a film documentary about the history of Windham Hill Records. Now, from most people that have heard the show, the other programs with musicians, you probably know how important Windham Hill has been in the history of New Age music. So I'm very glad to find out that Tal is doing this documentary. And first of all, to start with, Tal, I would like to ask you, what inspired you to do a documentary about Windham Hill Records?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for doing this. So I grew up in Mill Valley, California, which is just over the Golden Gate Bridge, in the 80s. And, I was in high school in the 80s. And I listened to Windham Hill all the time. I'm actually a musician. I started playing guitar when I was 10 years old. And then in high school, boy, I just listened to Will Ackerman and Alex and loved that style of music. Of course, tried to copy it as best I could. So it's always a big part of my life. I think like many people who just feel like it entered their consciousness and sort of stayed with them. When I was in high school, my father owned a toy store in downtown Mill Valley. And it was a toy store that imported toys from Europe, like wood toys, all very analog, And we played Windham Hill in the store constantly. So besides at home, it was just like entering into my consciousness constantly. And I think that's how it started.
Now, why now? Why do the documentary now? Because let me tell you something. I did as I told you, as we were chatting earlier, I did my radio show back in the 80s. But I had to let it die at the turn of the century for whatever reason. Energetically, I could not hold the show to keep on going. And I thought it was time for to let it go, and I was crushed because it was something I really loved doing. And this year, for another reason that I don't understand why, I started doing my show again. I started doing my show again in March 2024. So I don't know what's happening, but it looks quite interesting that, something is moving around the New Age environment because you're doing this documentary. And so why now?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? What's happening in the world? What's happening? I mean, that's a very good question. Well, for me, it's, an idea that's been percolating for many years as a filmmaker. I've made other documentaries about other subjects. I made an earlier documentary that was also about musicians, classical musicians who play in freelance orchestras and travel all around. These are people who don't have a permanent position and play in other orchestras. So because my background is both in film and music, I've always had an interest in that. I think your question is a really good one. I think, part of what we're trying to show in the film, besides this, movement of musicians, is how it connects to what went on in the 80s, but is also very much still happening now, which is technology is increasing. Our pace of life is getting faster and faster. People seem to be more anxious. And obviously, this has increased since the pandemic and political situations worldwide. I mean, we're just living in this more frantic, pumped up kind of existence. And I think that the music of Windham Hill was really the antithesis of that, was a place people, as you've probably felt listening to, could just enter, breathe, quiet down, and let that go. So I think that ties into why now. I think now more than ever, this is probably more, a pertinent topic in a sense.
Mm-hmm. But why did you choose Windham Hill Records? Because there are other labels that were doing New Age music like Narada or Music West, Private Music, Celestial Harmonies, and so on. Why did you choose Windham Hill?
Yeah, well, I think Windham Hill was one of the early, I mean, we don't say New Age because that's really a term they don't like that much, but it was really one of the early labels, right? I mean, ECM probably was an early adopter of this too, that delved into this kind of music, right? That was an interesting amalgamation. And I think that's what I was drawn to initially. It was a style unto itself, right? As you know, combined jazz, classical, George Winston borrowed from folk harmonies, and combined it into this very interesting new style of music, if you will. So I found that to be very interesting. I thought, besides the fact that it spoke to me early on, and there was also something very deep about the music. I always felt I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like when you sit down to listen to a Windham Hill, artist, whether it's Liz Story or Alex DeGrassi or Will Ackerman, many of the great artists there, you enter into a world inside yourself, right? And you start having images that come up. So I guess the long answer is, it sort of moved me. So I thought, well, maybe this topic will move other people as well.
Yeah, well, definitely Windham Hill was the strongest label in New Age that really, I understand that in the US the term New Age was very badly publicized and channeled, but you cannot have so many names for people to identify where to go get the music. And New Age was a short term, and it sort of gathered the ideas not only of the music but of the mindset, the thought of coming together of East and West, of coming together through inner connection and nature, which was what the music was sort of stimulating in in the musicians and also in the listeners who were looking for this sort of renaissance of coming back to nature, to connect internally. And that's what this kind of music helped us do, come back. Sadly, it was so badly publicized in your country that unlikely the term is not very well taken. But I would like to ask you, how did you contact the people in Windham Hill for this documentary and how they took it? But let's go to a small announcement cut and then we'll be back.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Estás escuchando New Age, el programa de la nueva era.
Okay, tell me though. So you got this stimulation to do this documentary on Windham Hill. What kind of research you had to do in order to program the format of the documentary?
Yeah, well, documentary filmmakers I think you hit it on the head, is that we're researchers as well as, that's part of what we have to do, is research the subject and understand the subject. So I did a lot of research. I read as much as I could. I also found some interesting people. There's a man who runs by the name of John Dark, who runs a wonderful Windham Hill Facebook site for fans and has also done a lot of research. He's sort of a super fan, has cataloged all the early Windham Hill recordings by catalog number. They're online if you want to see. So I reached out to some people who had this sort of depth of knowledge and talked with them, tried to understand the ethos of what it was about. I had my perspective, but I really wanted to bring that perspective into it. And then, of course, the big thing was first to reach out to Will Ackerman and have his blessing and interest. And we had a number of conversations over, a period of a year and a half before I even started filming, and discussed the project. And I told him my perspective, and he told me his thoughts and some stories. So that was a large part of it, of getting ready before we even filmed anything.
So what is the purpose of the documentary? You want to connect with the different musicians that were part of the Windham Hill and see how they felt about the music in those days? What focus are you giving to this documentary?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's part of it. Of course, we want to see what their connection was to the music, what each musician brought. And each musician came from a different place, right? Some people came from solo performance. People like Phil Auberg had played in bands with the Doobie Brothers and, came from a more of a gig musician angle. So I think part of it was what was happening during that time period in, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And there was an ethos that was happening, right? There was the New Age catalog, as you said before. I think you made a good point. There was people wanting to connect. There were a lot of social movements happening, right, at that time. So my interest again was sort of how did this music touch people? How did it connect to them? And I think we're going to do that in part through conversations. We've interviewed a lot of the musicians. We've had them play some of their pieces again. And then there's some wonderful archival footage we'll get into. But I think, there's the music side of it, and then there's the ethos side of it, which is we're trying to connect the two. Part of it is going to be about the style of music. Part of it will also be about how this music broke some ground in terms of technology. So a lot of the early techniques for how they recorded music at the time, how they placed microphones, how they used something called reverb to give the room sound, right? Were very innovative at the time. And so we'll be talking to some of the audio producers and recording engineers as well, and how they got that sound. Years ago, if you recorded, say, a piano in a concert hall, you would place the mics quite far away and you get a big sound of the hall. That would be a style that people were used to. Well, Will, when he started recording his guitar, had a different idea. He wanted to be as close as possible to really, so you could feel the intimacy and the feeling of what he was feeling as he was playing. So he brought all those, he had the recording, and with his recording engineers, they developed a sound where they had multiple mics, and they brought those microphones quite close. So I think Windham Hill listeners then grew to, maybe they didn't understand it consciously, but this new sound had largely also to do with how they were recording music and distributing music and, getting it out there with beautiful liner notes, etc.
And what have you found that made Windham Hill such a strong label?
I think people, and I see this with all the fans sort of coming out on Facebook again. I think people did, and still there's a whole other next generation, which is very interesting, musicians who are very much bringing that style into their music. I think people connected to the emotional part of the music. This was not, there were some amazing technically gifted people. Michael Hedges was an amazing player. Alex DeGrassi, unbelievable. Phil Auberg, the list could go on and on. But at the heart of it, I think, and the way Will Ackerman envisioned it, it was, he always said that when he tried to, he got hundreds of audition tapes in the early days once they started becoming popular. And when he listened to a tape, it was always about, how does it touch me emotionally? Let's put aside all the technical stuff. If that musician can touch me emotionally and speak to me in some way musically, and maybe even beyond that, then there's something there. So I think that's sort of the core of what interested me, and I think what's interesting about the label.
So is this something different from how other labels normally function?
These are great questions. My understanding is yes. A lot of labels have a pretty big corporate structure. They have middle managers and people who are making decisions sort of outside the musical sphere. And the Windham Hill label started with Will and his wife, and it was really their taste in music that determined who got on the label. There was no big corporation. It was just, him and Anne deciding, let's bring this person on. Or then he brought someone on and said, oh God, you have to listen to this guy. I heard this guy play this amazing tapping guitar, or, Michael Hedges. And so I think because it grew up in this sort of family atmosphere, it from what I understand, it really felt like a family growing. Then it was allowed to develop that way rather than in a corporate structure.
Great.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and listen to some music from different artists from the New Age label, Windham Hill, and then we'll be back to talk about who have you connected with for the documentary.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces, este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Permítenos acompañarte con New Age.
Okay, Tal, so why don't you share with us which musicians have you contacted and how was that experience of talking to them about the documentary?
Sure. Well, I think we've interviewed most of the call them first generation musicians who are still alive and who were in the first 10 years or so of the label. These would be, I won't list them all, but obviously Will Ackerman, Alex DeGrassi, Liz Story, Phil Auberg, Michael Manring, Mike Marshall, Daryl Anger, these folks. who were really the building blocks of the label, who were the early recordings. I am most thankful, I guess, to Alex DeGrassi to start, because a good friend of mine who's also a guitarist, who I met, I actually was a music major. I studied classical guitar at UC Santa Cruz, and we were friends. His name is Bill Coulter, and he's an excellent guitarist. Introduced, I told him I was working on this project, and he introduced me to Alex DeGrassi. So Alex was really my entry into this whole world, and we chatted and had a good connection. And so little by little, and he introduced me to Will. And from there, we sort of, each person introduced me to someone else. Will was incredibly generous in his time and also connecting me to other musicians. So it was very interesting. And, one thing that struck me that I wasn't prepared for was I knew they'd all be amazing musicians and they had great stories. There are some amazing stories of things that happened at that time, both on tour and recordings. But they also had a very deep world perspective and very thoughtful people to, each one of them. Liz Story knows a lot about physics and metaphysics and is very well read. I was very struck by G.E. Stinton of Shadowfax, who we talked politics and his trips to Russia and his perspective on, going there before the wall came down. I mean, just very interesting world perspectives. They all strike me as people interested in humanity in the world, not just music,
Mm-hmm.
So
that's probably why they do the kind of music they did those days. How did they take this idea of the documentary when you approached them?
How did they respond?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
They were all very excited. Yeah, everyone said, "Oh, I'd love to participate. I'm so glad you're doing this." A lot of these musicians are, let's say, in their latter years of life now. There's still a lot of them are performing and recording. Most of them are recording and performing. A lot of them are teaching and passing on to the next generation. But, this could hopefully be a little bit of a legacy for them to show what they've done and then to show what the next generation is doing with their music and passing it along. Yeah.
How far in the documentary are you done? I mean, are you putting it together? Are you going to still interview other musicians? Maybe Billy Oskay from Night Noise or Scott Kosu, that was also from the label in the beginning. I don't know. What are your plans still? What part of the documentary are you in?
Yeah. So we're in what I call the middle of production. So we're still filming. I'd say we'll still be filming for a little bit more and then getting into editing next year. So yeah, we still have people we want to talk to on the list. We've done quite a few, but there's certainly a few more. We won't be able to talk to everyone, unfortunately, because there's so many people. We're also talking to some people who were, staff and a little behind the scenes, but had a large effect on the label. For example, we talked with producer Stephen Miller, who recorded and produced a lot of the Solstice albums and other artists. So to see what their perspective is, because it's a little different than the musicians, right? A little outside and looking at how you produce an album. And some of the things they went through. So I think that'll be interesting. Talking to them. Yeah.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and listen to some more from Windham Hill artists, and then we will come back with Tal to talk about how is this being funded.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como GoyPasR, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad EC. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Abre las puertas de tu mundo interior y permanece con New Age.
Well, I hope you're enjoying the music. This is a documentary that Tal is doing about Windham Hill Records, and it's worth that you listen and remember or get to know the music behind this amazing label. So how is this being funded? You're an independent filmmaker, so I'm sure how do you get funds for this?
Right. Yeah. So in the States, unfortunately, unlike in Europe or perhaps, in South America, you could tell me there's often government funding that can help. Not so much maybe.
Here.
I'm sorry, but certainly in Europe you would have that. Here it's much harder. We are applying for grants and hoping that some of those will come through, and those are very helpful. We're also doing a Kickstarter, in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign currently. Thank you for your contribution. And that will help enormously. So there are a number of sources that go through, and some come, you raise funds in stages. There's the production stage, then post-production, there's distribution. There's a number of stages that we have to do. Luckily, I'm not alone. I have a very good associate producer and a cinematographer. So we have a little team that's working together on this. Yeah.
Wow. I imagine, the difficulty with getting enough funds, but how has the listeners or the audience that where you're targeting this Kickstarter, how have Windham Hill or New Age music lovers reacted to this?
It's been amazing. I'm just overwhelmed. I was just talking with Will Ackerman a few days ago, and he just said it's amazing, the outpouring of sort of love and memories. One thing we want to show in the film is to show how the music moved people at turning points in their life. People have on Facebook and otherwise responded, I got married to this music. When, I had a passing in my life, this is what my mother wanted to listen to. It's very deep. It's very deep that people are so affected. And, I felt the same way. So, the outpouring of interest is fantastic. I think it's always been there, and now it seems to be resurfacing. And people have so many things to say, and still, there's a huge group that have, the large collection of vinyl even, or listen to it every day, or when the solstice comes, you too, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's why I do the show, to keep on listening and promoting this music. Now, is it possible to share with the audience the little video that you did to invite people to participate? Yes?
Sure, that'll give a little flavor of the artists. Yeah.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and watch this video, and I want to ask you about possible new audiences for this music. After we listen to this, we watch this video, listen to it, and obviously accompanied by some more Windham Hill music.
Hi, I'm Tal Skloot, the director of A Quiet Revolution, the story of Windham Hill Records.
And I'm Asali Eccles, the associate producer.
The film will explore the genre-bending history of a record label that developed a new sound and musical movement. In a world of accelerating technologies and a frenetic lifestyle, this music allowed for a sense of introspection, contemplation, and harmony.
Your support will allow us to complete filming this feature documentary and bring it to audiences around the world. Thanks for watching, and enjoy this sneak peek of the film.
I don't read music. I have no academic training. All I have to rely on is emotion and trying to connect with my heart. We were a definition. People called it Windham Hill music. So the name became a genre.
Windham Hill, in a way, was its own gentle acoustic music. It's a way of connecting back with your true self and the beauty of the world.
One of the very first print ads that Windham Hill took out, it had all these different genres of music listed, and they were all crossed out. So it was defined by what it wasn't.
This was the height of the disco era. That kind of music was flashy, and there were dance moves, and Windham Hill was kind of the antithesis of that. We just wanted to do something that allowed us all to slow down and just kind of really listen to one note or one chord and let that experience move through us.
When I prepare myself, I go into a state of mind of just being there as a portal for the music that I don't get in the way of it. I love poetry, and I randomly went through books and then just took little phrases out and put them in this big jar, and that's the way I write music.
Here we are at the Varsity Theater in Palo Alto, where so much of Windham Hill got started. I think pretty much all of our first concerts were here. Alex DeGrassi, Michael Hedges, myself. This is the first place where we learned our chops of what it's like to be on the stage.
Rolling Stone says I'm Zen. I read it in the last issue, and God damn it, I want Zen out there.
Here we are, George Winston, Gold and Platinum. George did a lot.
It was really the just personal taste of Will Ackerman, recording musicians that he liked, which is an extremely honest way of doing it. There's sounds that I need for this particular song. The subconscious will take you there. Usually at the piano, something just kind of emerges and well, it reminds me of Eastern Montana in October or something. And if it has a picture with it in my mind, then it stays around.
I was thinking about my childhood in this town, and I was thinking about the high plains, I was thinking about the landscape. I was thinking about a storm that I could see coming for about 60 miles, and those clouds just, tiny, and then all of a sudden you're engulfed in it. We all had an appreciation for taking care of that place. Those kind of things inspired us when we were writing music, for sure.
At that time, there was a huge back to nature movement, the Whole Earth catalog. Everyone was moving back to the land, and music that gave you that feeling that you have when you're out in nature.
Sometimes a whisper is the greatest way to get somebody's attention. So this idea of tying it to nature and the stillness of being in a forest was certainly an antidote to how fast life was moving.
When my daughter, who's our second child, was to be born, when we went into labor, we made sure to bring a couple of CDs, and the first one was An Evening with Windham Hill Live. And it was just what we wanted to bring her into the world to.
We were so right time, right place, and pure heart, and people heard it.
Let me tell you why we came to Kickstarter. The story of Windham Hill Records has to be told truthfully, and the best way to do that is to be independent.
We also want to reach a community of people who get it. Maybe you're a fan of Windham Hill, or maybe you love music documentaries. Thank you for watching, and thanks so much for your support.
Este es el espacio de New Age.
Okay, Tal, I imagine that most of the people targeted are sort of my age or somewhere in between this
My
generation.
age too.
Yeah, older generation that grew up or connected to New Age music back then in the 80s and the 70s. So have you noticed new generations getting involved in tasting and knowing more about this music, or is just us?
Yeah, for sure. I think there is a lot of younger musicians listening to the music and integrating it into their music. I just got a note from Barbara Higbee, who is part of Montreux, who's currently touring in Europe for the past month or so, I think. She just wrote me and said, I was just at a festival in Europe, and I saw this amazing young female guitarist playing in the exact same style as Michael Hedges. And she was, doing all kinds of stuff. And she said, it's amazing. And she's brilliant, So I think definitely younger artists are aware of this music and are adapting some of those techniques and that ethos into their music. And I think what's interesting is then there's also, I think G.E. Stinton might have said this, I believe it was, that there's also bringing it into the modern ethos. So young people are often dealing with electronics and right sequencing and other forms of non-acoustic music, but somehow are still bringing some of the sonic qualities of the music of Windham Hill into that kind of music, right? Which is very encouraging to see. It means the music isn't dying, it's just continuing to progress into another style, you know?
Yeah, now you talked about musicians. How about listeners? I mean, is there an audience that is open, a younger audience that is open to listen to guitar solos, piano solos that are not classical music from centuries ago, but rather, you know, like original, instrumental, acoustic, electronic, or acoustic, electronic music combined? How about younger audience that could listen to this? Is there anything you found about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, part of what's happening is a lot of these musicians, I'll just say, are teaching. Let's see. So Alex DeGrassi does a guitar workshop. He does a number of guitar workshops with younger students. We filmed one of these. Daryl Anger has this wonderful online fiddle school that he's been doing for many years, where he's taught, I believe, hundreds of students his style of music. And remember, since Windham Hill was an amalgamation of styles, you know, a combination of styles, there are lots of young bluegrass players out there still, right? In Nashville, there's lots of people who pick up guitars and like to just play quiet acoustic, you know, whether it's classical or folk-inspired guitar. So, yeah, they can all hear this and then incorporate into their music this idea of, hey, I don't have to play one style like Windham Hill artists. I can blend styles and create my own sound. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like in the U.S., in the United States, I can see that happening in Europe a lot because they have such a great cultural background in music coming from the classical composers that can resonate very much with the new age music. So how about in the States, in the United States? I mean, is there the younger generations are connecting to this rich kind of cultural heritage?
That's a really good question. You know, and again, I'm not that age group, so I'm not the expert for sure. But I think there is an interest in it, and I'll tell you why. I think you need to come from that, understand some of the background to see where to go to, right? For example, in Berkeley, there's a school that trains junior high school students in classical music for 3 hours every morning before they go on to do their regular academics. And, you know, it's heartening to see that in the United States, we had, you know, at one period, certain propositions that cut down music in schools, but now there seem to be ways for it to be coming back and a reemergence. You know, I think young people, I see this in my child, you know, certainly listen to music in a different way now, right? They don't listen to a whole album. They jump around, you know, on Spotify. They sample things and put them together. But I think they can very much, hopefully, understand that in a sense, Windham Hill artists were doing that all along. They were taking different styles of music, and though it was acoustic music, it wasn't for, well, there's also electronic, they were amalgamating these different kinds of music into their own style. That's exactly what kids are doing now with, you know, with sampling and sequencing when they're making their own music. Yeah.
Amazing. You mentioned re-emergence, the re-emergence of, you know, this contact with this kind of music that, again, I'm trying to understand, and I don't know, you know, I've been asking myself, why was I stimulated unconsciously and consciously to go back to do my radio show? And I see you doing this documentary now, and this re-emergence. There's something happening. I don't know what it is. It's different to pinpoint out. Maybe somebody with more light can help us understand what is happening, that this is coming back. it's like a cycle, and it's coming back after so many years. What do you think you're going to achieve with this documentary?
Yeah, well, I hope, speaking of that cycle, that it can have some impact on people. And I think the very things we're not really naming, but we're all feeling, and you're feeling, is like we said, in this period where so many stresses are on people. And I feel for the young generation with our environment. And, you can name one thing after another if you want to, talk about the gloom. But I think the light in all that is that there still are ways to enter in and see the good and see, and part of that is perhaps not always, we're so stimulated by exterior forces, by constantly being on our phone, to be bombarded by media. And I think perhaps the young generation has in part forgotten a little bit that a lot of their power and strength is internal, and they have it inside them, and they just have to look and give it time, have the quiet and the focus to let that come out. And again, I think that theme is very much reflected in the music of Windham Hill. That's, what these folks were trying to do. They were doing that. They were looking inside and letting that come out rather than responding to the external, craziness of the world. So, yeah.
I think you tapped into something very powerful, and is that they brought their soul. They composed and they played from the heart. And these new generations that are so stressed from all the world chaos and the stress of social media and the stress of this and that, and they maybe need to connect to these heartfelt experiences in order to kind of center themselves and be able to get a glimpse of what their life can be, what their mission in life can be. And this music is so amazingly enriching internally that I'm sure we'll see the effects of what you're doing when this gets going on, because it's going to be next year, 2025. Is this when the documentary is going to be launched?
Not quite sure. We'll probably be editing in 25. The air date is not set yet, so we're still in process. We'll let you know as soon as we know.
I have to wait for so long, but
I know. Unfortunately, films take a while.
I imagine it takes a while. I have never been involved with that, but okay. So I would like to go ahead and listen to some more Windham Hill music and come back and talk about what else can we do to support you in doing this amazing documentary.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
So Tal, what can people do to support this project? What since it's independent documentary filmmaking project, what can anybody else do to support the continuing of this amazing documentary?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, well, immediately, we're still in our last month of what's called a Kickstarter campaign to raise funds to finish filming the film. And if you just go to kickstarter.com and type in Windham Hill, that might be the easiest way. And then you can see a little sample we've put together of many of the Windham Hill artists and read about the film, read about the history. So whether you contribute or not, that's a way to learn a little bit more about Windham Hill. And then I'd say go out and start listening as much as you can. A lot of, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have listened to some of the earlier recordings, but many of these artists, for example, Will Ackerman has his recording studio, Imaginary Road in Vermont, and he's constantly bringing in younger artists and releasing amazing albums that he's producing there. of up and coming people who are inspired by Windham Hill and other genres of music. And so try to seek those out, I'd say, and listen to what the next generation is doing, as well as, of course, many artists are still releasing albums, their own albums, and collaborating. I think I talked with Michael Mannering, the bassist. He says he doesn't have a day where he's not working. I mean, he's constantly recording on some kind of album project or performing. They're busy musicians. So I'd say, yeah, go out and keep searching the outgrowth of this music. Yeah.
Were you able to interview George Winston before he left this plane?
I'm very sad to say we did not. He was we tried for that whole year, but he was quite ill and unable to. We do have some very nice archival material that we are allowed to use and we're going to talk to people who knew him closely to sort of get that perspective.
Oh, that's wonderful. At least you're going to give a glimpse of those who are not here anymore. Chuck Greenberg from Shadowfax or any other musicians that have passed. That would be beautiful for people to take a look at them and feel them personally. So that would be beautiful in the documentary. So,
yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to say, in fact, in the interviews, that there are, since I think while these people didn't all hang out together all the time, they really did admire each other's playing enormously. So we do have, a lot of comments about, people who've passed, particularly Winston and Michael Hedges and others. So it'll be interesting, I think, for people to hear other musicians talk about them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Michael Mannering was so close to Michael Hedges. I'm sure he can give you so much about him. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you very much for the time you've given us and for helping us to reconnect again just with Windham Hill music. I wish you the best in the documentary, and we'll be, following the footsteps to see how it grows, and whenever it's ready, for sure, we'll be very interested to watch it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the thoughtful and well thought out questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So we're going to say goodbye now, listening to some more Windham Hill music. And we remember Kickstarter. You go to Kickstarter.com. That's right, Kickstarter. I'll put the link here in the description from the Vimeo and the YouTube channels. I'll put the link to the Kickstarter of the Windham Hill. If you please can send me through the email so I can directly put it. And I hope people get motivated from wherever in the world they watch this video to support your project. I can't wait, actually. I'm very happy that you decided to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so until we connect again, bye-bye, Tal.
Bye-bye.